With MoP Classic releasing in the next month, now is as good a time as ever to brush up on the basics of Unholy DK and how the class will play in the next expansion. Whether you're someone who's returning to the game from Warcraft Classic, you're considering playing Unholy DK for the first time, or you're a returning veteran from Cataclysm Classic, this video will cover everything you need to know about Unholy DK to play it well and to have a solid foundation. Snapshotting. For starters, you might be asking, what is snapshotting and why is it important? So for MoP, we snapshot both our frost fever and blood plague diseases, and it's important because diseases make up the large majority of our damage profile. So, snapshotting our diseases means whatever strength and crit buffs you have the moment you apply your diseases are essentially snapped, or applied for the full duration your diseases last. Strength and crit are the only stats that snapshot with our diseases, so, for example, if I have a Fallen Crusader proc for my weapon enchant, and apply my diseases will have the Fallen Crusader buff applied for the whole duration thereof. So we actually apply our diseases with either Plague Strike, Outbreak, or Unholy Blight if you take the talent. Plague Strike actually applies both of our diseases, contrary to how it was in Wrath and Cata. We had to use both Icy Touch and Plague Strike. So with the typical opener, you start by applying your diseases with Plague Strike, continue the normal rotation, and you outbreak to snapshot your diseases once you have as many strength buffs as possible. So as you can see here below, if you watch this disease tracker here, you can see the percentage increase as I receive more buffs from Trinket procs, my Synapse Springs, Blood Fury, and Fallen Crusader proc. So I actually start by applying my diseases here with Plague Strike as you see here, and you see my first Trinket proc immediately on pull, then my second Trinket, and then my Fallen Crusader proc. I use Blood Fury and Synapse Springs, and then snapshot my diseases with the highest possible percentage, displaying on my tracker by using Outbreak. Ideally, everything procs together before any one buff expires, but of course, there's a bit of RNG with that. But that's the basics of disease snapshotting. Pet dynamics. As an Unholy DK, managing your pets is essential given how much of your damage is from pets. We have a Ghoul, Gargoyle, and Army of the Dead. In the past, Gargoyle used to snapshot similar to our diseases with crit and strength. However, in MoP, all of our pets are now dynamic, meaning their power changes as ours does as buffs proc and expire. This means we're no longer holding Gargoyle as we wait for our procs. Instead, we want to try to use Gargoyle before anything procs, and before we use any unused trinkets or abilities like Synapse Springs or Blood Fury. So ideally, you would use Gargoyle just as you pull on a boss to maximize the uptime of all of your procs and strength buffs, since Gargoyle lasts about 30 seconds and takes about 2.5 seconds to fly down. So for example, if we had a 10-second pull timer, we would cast Army of the Dead at about 8 seconds like I do here, and then pre-pot at 1 second, and then summon your Gargoyle on pull. In tank and spank fights, open with all cooldowns in your pre-potion to benefit from the longest buff window possible. You can use only one potion per combat, and if you pre-pot before the boss is engaged, you can use a second during the fight. Also, another good thing to keep in mind is that Gargoyle remains stationary when summoned, so ensure it's placed in a safe location to survive its full duration. Pooling runic power. Sometimes it is more optimal to pool your runic power. What this means is instead of continuing to dump our runic power into death coils like we typically would, we let our runic power build up or pool. This technique is important for increasing our dark transformation uptime on our ghoul, an important buff that increases our ghoul's damage output in both single target and AoE scenarios. If we pool runic power as dark transformation expires, we can quickly get off 3 death coils in succession to get closer to the 5 Shadow Infusion stacks that we need for another dark transformation. You can see me do this here. At about 8 to 10 seconds left of my ghoul's dark transformation, I stop using death coil and start saving my runic power until it maxes out. Rune Management. Runes are one of your main resources you use for abilities as an Unholy DK, and you have 2 of each kind of rune between Frost, Blood, and Unholy. You want to keep 1 of each kind of rune recharging at all times. We never want 2 of the same kind of rune available during our rotation. We also have Death Runes, which could be spent on any ability we want. We receive Death Runes through our Reaping passive ability that states Blood Strike, Pestilence, Festering Strike, Icy Touch, or Blood Boil cause the runes used to turn into Death Runes. We don't use Blood Strike in a rotation anymore though, and Icy Touch is now very rarely used since we apply both diseases with Plague Strike, so for all intents and purposes, we get Death Runes of Festering Strike in single target scenarios and Blood Boil or Pestilence in AoE scenarios. Therefore, we want to convert our Blood and Frost Runes of Festering Strike, which requires one of each in our rotation, so we can get more Death Runes. We use our Death Runes along with Unholy Runes to spend them on as many Scourge Strikes as possible, Death and Decay on cooldown, and Dark Transformation when needed. Managing our runes becomes this revolving door, swapping between Death Runes and our normal sets of runes. Two-handed versus dual-wield weapons. So for those of you coming back to the game from Warcraft Classic, you remember the dual-wield MoP spec being the dominant playstyle for most of the expansion until you got your hands on the legendary Shadowmoor. However, with the way our rune regeneration system got reworked in Cata, with our runes no longer having their own cooldown, and with Scourge Strike only costing a single Unholy rune instead of an Unholy and Frost rune, dual-wield Unholy is no longer viable and something of the past. Unholy is now only played with a two-handed weapon. Scourge Strike has become one of the larger portions of our damage in comparison to how it was in Warcraft Classic, as a result of having much better weapons and Scourge Strike scaling with your weapon damage. This is why we no longer play the dual-wield Unholy playstyle that dominated Warcraft Classic. Alright, other tips and tricks. So positioning is important to keep in mind. Make sure you're attacking from behind. This increases your hit chance, avoids parries, and reduces incoming damage by avoiding any frontal attacks. And there are also a few things to consider in AoE and cleave scenarios. Because our diseases are taking damage over time, or dots, it might not be worth spreading them to adds if the adds aren't living long enough. Our diseases tick once every 3 seconds. Also, not all AoE counts towards your boss parses, so knowing the rules for each encounter is important if you're attempting to parse. It's important to know and familiarize yourself with our defensive utilities. We have both Icebound Fortitude, or IBF, and Anti-Magic Shell, or AMS, as personal cooldowns to survive, and we have Anti-Magic Zone, or AMZ, as a raid cooldown if we talent into it. IBF is a 3-minute cooldown that's immune stun effects and reduces all damage taken by 20% for 12 seconds. AMS absorbs 75% of all incoming magic damage up to a maximum of 50% of your health. The damage absorbed generates runic power and lasts about 5 seconds. AMZ also reduces magic damage by 40% and places a zone on the ground for the raid to stand inside. It lasts for 3 seconds. Use AMS aggressively to build runic power in fights you can use it. Depending on the outgoing magic damage on certain boss fights, you can get one or sometimes multiple full runic power bars worth of runic power. Make sure you are aware of the kind of damage boss spells do, so familiarize yourself with their abilities and which ones are magic damage. Also, make sure you utilize Mind Freeze to interrupt casts as often as possible. Mind Freeze is off the GCD, so it isn't a hindrance to your rotation to use. If you coordinate interrupts with your raid, this will help consistency and almost eliminate the cost in DPS when it's done well. Track the internal cooldown, or ICD, of your trinkets. This helps with planning for burst windows and managing other things like your diseases when you need a new snapshot. Use your engineering gloves, racial abilities, and potions in sync with burst windows to maximize your damage output. Depending on the fight, you may want your trinkets to proc early or late. You can use ICDs to your advantage by swapping your trinkets before you pull to manipulate their cooldown. You can also do this just before trash or in between trash packs to avoid accidentally putting a trinket on cooldown before a boss. Bonus performance tools. So there are a couple websites that I really recommend utilizing to help improve your performance and maximize and optimize your gear, enchants, and professions. So the first one being WoW Sims. You can run simulations of your character to optimize gear, enchants, professions, and racial choices. It's one of the best resources for understanding your scaling and gearing. And then there's Warcraft Logs. Helps you analyze your parses, improve your personal performance, and enter the competitive side of raiding. Learn what counts for your logs, and just how you stack up against the competition. And last but not least, we have a next action guide, or the NAG, that I would recommend when you're attempting to learn the rotation for the first time. It's an in-game rotation helper developed by some of the top players in the world. It simplifies your UI by reducing tracker clutter and showing the exact next action to take. It's great for both beginners and even pros, just for those looking to improve their rotation. It's free on Training Dummies, premium access elsewhere. Code Ketchupchips gives 10% off. Alright, well that covers today's video. If you have any additional questions, comment below or find me in the Ebonhole Discord linked in the description. Thanks for watching.